Alright, ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to talk about the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. We talked about its creation yesterday, the Continental Convention. James Madison brings his Virginia Plan, and because of the Virginia Plan, and it became the basis of our Constitution, he is known as the father of the Constitution. The New Jersey Plan, which is contrary to the Virginia Plan, the Great Compromise, and the Three-Fifths Compromise coming them together. So most people were happy, most of the people at the convention were happy with the Constitution, but first it needed to be ratified, approved by the states. So it needed to be approved of 2/3 or 9 of the 13 state governments before it became accepted as the law of the land. And while there certainly were people who were happy with the Constitution, there were also many who were suspicious of it. Again, they were still very, very much afraid of a strong, powerful federal government that could take away their rights. And so to kind of ease people's fears and to kind of state what it's all about, James Madison, who wrote the Virginia Plan, John Jay, who we talked about earlier, is going to be one of the people who go over and negotiate the Treaty of Paris, and a guy by the name of Alexander Hamilton, who is going to play a major role as the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States government. He's the guy in the $10 bill because of it. They're going to write a series of essays that become known as the Federalist Papers, basically breaking it down. This is why we do this. This is why we have the 3 branches. This is how the 3 branches protects. This is what the president does. This is what the president can't do. Really explaining the ins and outs of the Constitution for the people. So the people who weren't present at the arguing back and forth in the convention, this was to convince them, look, this is why it works, this is why it can't take away your rights, this is why you can trust it, this is why you should accept it. And what really is still important for us today, because people still debate exactly what is meant in certain parts of the Constitution, and we'll talk about that in class a little bit more. The Federalist Papers is what people fall back to. This is what they meant when they said this in the Constitution. This is what they meant when they said presidents have certain powers and can't do certain things. So Federalist Papers is still important to this day in helping us to understand the Constitution. And so kind of the first political parties, truly American, are going to be created. The Federalists, who are those who supported the ratification of the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists were those who opposed them, who thought that the Constitution, even with the separation of powers and the checks and balances and the limitations and so on, they still felt that, yeah, but the government can still take away our rights. There's no actual written guarantee of rights. There's nothing that firmly states in the Constitution you can't take away certain rights. And so they were not still ready to accept the Constitution without some sort of a guarantee of personal liberties. And that guarantee is going to be the Bill of Rights. So the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, again, reached a compromise. One of the cool things, there's a lot of compromising going on, as something that I've stated has kind of been lost in our current government system, the ability to find a common ground. They could back then. So the Federalists promised, all right, if you guys will help to ratify it now, we promise that once the new government is created and once the first Congress meets, their first course of action will be to create a Bill of Rights. And it was kind of cool because the Anti-Federalists kind of had to trust the Federalists that this was going to happen. They kind of just gave them their word, and quite in fact, it did. They agreed to help ratify the Constitution. It was ratified. It got 9. Eventually, all 13 states ratified it. Once they got 9, then it became the law of the land. George Washington was elected as our first president. We'll talk about his presidency specifically later on. But when the first Congress met, one of the first actions they had was to create the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Amendments are simply just changes. So the first 10 changes to the Constitution, additions to it, are collectively known together as the Bill of Rights, which firmly state that certain rights flat out are protected and Congress cannot take them away and we will go over exactly what those are later. But with the Bill of Rights, we have the Constitution. The Constitution is adopted, becomes a law of the land, and has been ever since. Alright, so we have the Constitution. Hasn't worked out perfectly, but overall, pretty successfully. And next, we'll talk about the actual structure of the Constitution